Story recapped here. Today, I'm going to explain a crime, drama, and fantasy film called Vore. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. In the port of Gothenburg, Sweden, an extraordinary woman, Tina, who has a seemingly odd interest in insects, has distinctive Neanderthalic facial features, wrought by a rare case of chromosomal abnormality, a disorder that makes her open to unpleasant stares from other people, especially during her day job. Despite her condition and appearance, Tina excels in her work and is respected by her colleagues. Due to the abnormal mutation of her chromosomes, Tina is gifted with super-heightened olfactory senses, comparable to a trained K9 dog unit that can detect contrabands about hundreds of meters away. One day, during her shift, Tina calls one of the passengers' attention. She confiscates his bag, hands it over to her colleague, and without even opening it, she declares that there are 4 liters of liquor inside the young man's bag. Unimpressed by her demonstration, the young passenger protests that he has legally bought the liquor. Tina calmly tells him about the charges that he will be dealing with for possessing liquor at a minor age. Caught red-handed, the young passenger immediately takes his leave without an argument. Past her shift, Tina drives home to her secluded house in the woods. She lives with her boyfriend, Roland, a dog trainer, who often keeps his dogs away from her because of the inexplicable hostility of the animals towards her. Exasperated by the usual scene inside the house, Tina decides to take a walk around the woods. The next morning, Tina goes to work on a seemingly typical day. Doing her usual checks, she sniffs on each person, waiting for some unusual smell that she can point out to intercept. One of the passengers, a very unsuspecting man wearing a decent suit, catches Tina's attention. She calls the man for inspection. Her colleague makes the initial bag check but finds nothing suspicious inside it. Looking apprehensive, Tina suddenly asks for his cell phone. The man refuses and asserts that he has no room for any more delays. Tina and her colleague insist. Leaving him without a choice, the man compels to get checked. After sniffing closely on his cell phone, Tina removes the memory card. Suddenly, the man panics, snatches the memory card from Tina's hands and puts it inside of his mouth in an attempt to swallow it. Luckily, Tina's colleague is quick enough to hold the man's cheeks, preventing him from causing any damage to the card. Then he holds the man down just as the other security personnel takes the memory card out of his mouth. Still in a state of disbelief about the earlier scene, Tina returns to her post just as the newly arriving passengers are coming out from the terminal again. Suddenly, she smells an alluring scent among all of the passengers who came out, but none of them seem to match. Then from a distance, the last passenger finally comes out. A strange man named Vore passes in front of her, bearing the same facial features the same as hers. Tina calls him for inspection. As Tina checks inside his bag, she finds ordinary belongings except for a container of litter falls and a modified stainless box with a thermometer and some wires attached to it. Suspicious of the device, Tina asks for its purpose just as she opens the box to find more dried leaves, some maggots, and some resting pupas. Vore explains that the device is a larvae hatcher and he uses it for his job. Then he tries to make a conversation by asking her whether she likes insects as well. Drawn by his scent, Tina is unable to answer. She avoids the conversation and directs him to the exits. Vore is too cunning to miss Tina's affinity towards him. Just before he goes, he mischievously tells Tina how sure he is that she also likes insects. Showing his marvel to know that fact, Tina remains standing speechless while looking at him leave. Later, Tina visits her dad at the nursing home. She greets him enthusiastically, but her dad, who is suffering from dementia, doesn't recognize her at all. As Tina approaches closer, he finally recognizes his own daughter. She brings him outside in a wheelchair and arrives at their favorite spot. Her dad starts the conversation by asking how things are doing with Roland. He notices how spiritless Tina is, so he bluntly asks about their romance in bed. Tina feels awkward and avoids the question. Tina's dad then points out how Roland is just using her for his own advantage. She defends this by saying that she needs Roland to look after her house whenever she's gone. Deep inside, Tina is aware of the reality of how Roland sees her as a being, but she tries to turn a blind eye. As she arrives home, she tries to make a conversation with Ronald. He tries to engage, but his attention is evidently more on the television than with her. Tired of all the pretense, Tina decides to take a walk outside instead. The next day, Tina is invited by Agent Agneta to talk about her discovery of the memory card the other day. Agneta tells her that the card contains illegal and explicit videos and asks Tina how she happens to know about the contents of the card without even seeing the man for the first time. Tina explains that she really doesn't know what was on the card, but instead, she explains how she can smell anxiety all over the suspect. Agneta feels skeptical about her story, but Tina further explains how she can perceive things other than the tangible ones through her sense of smell. Gifted with phenomenal olfactory senses, Tina can perceive the intangibles such as human emotions by smelling them, such as guilt, shame, anger, fear, and even deception. Now believing in her story, Agent Agneta stops her interrogation. Later on, she requests Tina's help to solve the underlying case just as she briefs her on the proceedings. The following day, Vore, coming from another trip, returns to the port and passes by Tina's post again. He smiles and greets her and voluntarily surrenders himself for inspection. As Tina's colleague thoroughly checks inside Vore's bag, he finds nothing suspicious. Tina's colleague declares him clean, however, Tina insists that he's got something on him, so they decide to proceed to the next course of action, which is to strip search Vore. However, after the search, Tina's colleague confirms that Vore is clean. He then expresses his disappointment at Tina for being compelled to conduct the search instead of her after finding a very long embarrassing scar on Vore's tailbone and subsequently discovering that Vore has female genitals. Uncertain of how she should feel, Tina is caught between feeling sorry and joyful. Her remorse comes from the fact that they have violated his civic rights, but at the same time, her joy comes from the thought that she can finally unveil the mystery of her being for the first time with the help of Vore, who happens to be very similar to her. Tina then marches towards Vore to apologize. She tells him that he can file a formal complaint against her. Vore shows his kindness by refusing to file a complaint. Tina pushes his kindness and asks him about his personal life. He generously responds that he travels a lot and doesn't stay in one place to study insects. As they continue to converse, they end up introducing themselves to one another. Tina's curiosity about herself grows even fonder after talking with Vore. She then visits her dad to confront him about her scars. Her dad tells her that she got her scars when she was 3 after falling down from a tree and landing on a sharp rock. After hearing her dad's story, she feels unsatisfied with his tale. The following day, Tina goes over to Vore's hostel, determined to find some real answers. Outside his hostel, Tina finds him collecting maggots on a tree. He approaches her and invites her to try his newly collected maggot. Tina declines in disgust, but Vore insists as he feeds the maggot on her mouth. As Tina devours the small maggot, she feels a little satisfaction. As she indulges herself with the guilty pleasure, she becomes more concerned and insecure towards herself. In order for her to know more about the truth of her identity, she invites Vore to stay at her place. Arriving at Tina's place, Vore approaches the barking dogs and shows an aggressive snarl like of a prominent wild beast, turning the dogs submissive. Tina is astonished by what she has seen, then she feels confident and secure with Vore's presence. She then introduces Vore to Roland. Tina informs Roland that he will be occupying the vacant house next to them. Since Vore is already at their place, Roland is unable to object to Tina's sudden decision. The next day, Tina accompanies a police agent to investigate the suspects. She sees a man walking inside an apartment and senses the unusual smell of explicitness and shame on the man. They follow him inside but are unable to conduct their search. Before the occupants close their doors, Tina and her colleague hear a baby's cry. They return to the station to report on their investigation but end up getting reprimanded by Agneta for being careless. Tina asserts that she is 100% sure that the couple will be violating the infant and insists on busting their apartment. The police agent who is with Tina confirms that he has also heard a baby crying. However, because of lack of evidence, he explains that they cannot just barge in without any proof or documents to support their operation. Tina concedes and goes home frustrated. Tina spends her time alone, picking mushrooms in the woods. Coincidentally, Vore is also there picking the same mushrooms. Tina compliments the surroundings and tells Vore how everything looks like in the fairy tales. Then she starts to share about her childhood and how she thinks of being special among the rest of the kids but ends up realizing to be only a mere human with a chromosome flaw that makes her different from the rest. She continues to explain that aside from her unusual appearance, she is also suffering from infertility because of disorganized placements of her reproductive organs. Vore remarks that she is different because she is better than the rest of them and tells her not to listen to what humans say. On that day, Vore discovers that one of Tina's neighbors just recently delivered a child. He goes to see the neighbors as he makes an excuse to borrow a saucepan. Being invited inside, he goes to see the newborn baby, acting all malicious as he compliments the child. Later that night, Vore is feeling restless inside his cabin. As the night gradually becomes deeper, the more he becomes disturbed. He goes into the woods as he experiences unusual pain in his gut. Feeling agitated, he moves deeper into the woods. Unable to contain the pain, Vore stops and removes his pants while his reproductive organ protrudes between his legs as if giving birth, as he screams more in pain. The following morning, Tina and the police agent are on a stakeout for the suspects. The agent explains the suspects' usual routine and tells Tina that they only have an hour to break into their apartment to collect evidence. After they enter, they see nothing out of the ordinary. However, using her extraordinary olfactory senses, Tina moves directly towards a bookshelf and opens a trophy, finding a camera and discovering footage of a baby being abused. Presenting all the evidence in the interrogation room, the suspects deny the accusation, leaving Tina to feel strong resentment towards them. One day, a thunderstorm approaches. Tina is busy pulling the wires out from the outlets as she moves around the house in a panic. Then she sees Vore standing in front of her door, looking anxious towards the upcoming storm. Just as she opens the door to let Vore in, the storm suddenly breaks as the two of them quickly huddle under the table, terrified with every strike of lightning. They then move outside after the storm clears, and Vore suddenly kisses Tina to her surprise. Tina shows aggression towards Vore like a wild animal, snarling and sticking her tongue out. Vore smiles in gratification, for he knows it is how their kind shows affection towards their partner when they are ready to mate. Acting like wild animals as a sign of their intimacy, they end up arousing themselves and spend the whole day consummating one another. After long hours of intimate moments, Vore tells the confused Tina about her real identity. He reveals that Tina is a troll just like he is. He explains that everything that is happening to her doesn't have anything to do about chromosomal abnormality, but it's her ability as a troll to acquire a heightened sense of smell, just like the animals in the wild, and the scar on her tailbone used to be her tail that was removed from her. As Tina shows admiration towards Vore's words, he finally tells her that he is in search of a specific group of trolls that maintains a furtive existence in Finland. He then asks her if she wants to go with him to Finland, to which Tina agrees. The next morning, excited about her newfound identity, Tina restarts her life like a troll in the wild. Carefree from all the trivial matters in life, the two of them run within the confines of the woods. Tina asks Vore why he didn't tell her for so long. Vore explains how hesitant he was to tell her from the start, knowing how perfectly she has adapted to human life. Nonetheless, Vore reveals the cruelty humans committed against their kind. He shares about his parents and how other troll captives became test subjects for human research, which ultimately killed a lot of them. Vore then swears his vengeance against the humans. Tina decides to visit her dad again to confront him about the truth. Arriving at the nursing home, Tina wakes her dad and starts to ask about her real identity. Her dad adheres to his fabricated stories. She starts to get angry and her dad gets terrified and immediately shouts to call the nurse's attention. Just as the nurse arrives, Tina is directed to leave. Tina arrives home feeling upset. She casts Roland out as she throws his things outside the house. Petrified of what Tina has become, Roland leaves in the morning, bringing only his dogs with him. After seeing Roland leave, she goes to see Vore at his cabin. She notices that no one is around, so she enters of her own volition. Inside, she hears an indistinct sound of a baby that is coming from the refrigerator. She opens the fridge and sees a box. As she takes the box out, the baby's cry becomes more conspicuous. She then opens it and finds a deformed infant. To her surprise, she immediately returns the baby back inside the fridge, keeping the discovery to herself. Meanwhile, one of the suspects is being transported to a new location. Along the way, they suddenly stop for a wild moose who is standing on the road. As they wait for the moose to make its way, Vore suddenly appears from behind, pulls the suspect out from the van, and knocks him down dead on the ground. The emergency response team, together with Tina, arrives and secures the crime scene. As Tina checks on the crime scene, she suddenly feels restless. Agneta notices her anxiety and asks if she's found something. Tina denies her lead and continues to walk further into the woods. Deep in the woods, she finds Vore. He then admits that he is with the suspect and tells Tina that he needed to do it in order to stop the suspect from talking. As Tina reacts violently, Vore tries to hold her tight as he explains that he is only doing it to inflict pain on humans. Tina confronts him about her discovery of a baby that he kept inside the fridge. Vore smiles and explains that it is neither a baby nor a human, but a hyzid or a changeling, a human-like creature used as a substitute when trolls abduct human babies. He further explains that he occasionally gives birth to a changeling and confesses that he uses it in exchange for every human baby he abducts. Just as humans take away from them, he takes in return from humans. Tina then asks about the human babies that he took. He deliberately replies that he sells them. Disgusted by Vore's revelations, Tina displays her dominance and resentment towards him. As Vore is about to show his submission, Tina suddenly turns his back and walks out, leaving Vore behind. The next day, Tina catches sight of an ambulance parking in front of her neighbor's house. She quickly goes inside to check on her neighbor's situation. Later, she discovers that Vore replaced their baby with a changeling. She immediately rushes to Vore's cabin and finds out that Vore has already left. As Tina looks for some scent to track him, she finds a note instead that says to meet him on the ferry. Later that night, Tina goes to the ferry to meet up with Vore. Vore is surprisingly happy to see her. As he notices Tina's despair on her face, the police are already surrounding him, ready to take him in. Vore bids his last farewell to Tina just as the police restrains and arrests him. As the police move him in, Vore suddenly struggles and jumps overboard, disappearing into the water. Back at her house, Tina's dad visits her. He confesses how her parents were once a part of an experiment. And he, as a caretaker of the science facility, was asked by her troll parents to take care of her young self before the scientists discover her existence. Because of his wife's desire to have a child of their own, they wholeheartedly took Tina in as their daughter. Sensing her dad's sincerity, Tina asks how her original parents named her. Her dad replies Riva. Months later, Tina, now known as Riva, continues her life as a troll in the forest. Then one day, she goes back to her abandoned house where she sees a large box wrapped in paper that was left in the front door. She drags the box inside and opens it. Inside the box is a troll infant. She goes to the box to find some scent prints that she can identify, but instead finds a musical postcard of Finland. Looking at the postcard, she knows that it is both Vore's and her child. As she takes her baby outside, she shows a determined face to raise her child as her own. She feeds him with an insect crawling out from decomposing lumber. Caught between the border between being a human and a troll, Tina chooses a life of a troll in the end as she raises her child in the wilderness, free from the harm of the discriminating humans. Subscribe to watch more videos like this. Turn on notifications. And leave a like, it really helps the channel out. Thank you for watching.